Please be seated. The court is now back in session. Before I hand the floor to the defense counsel for Kiel Sampon, the chamber would like to clarify the ICJ decision in relation to this witness to TCW 859 on 16 August 2016. The International Court Mexican judge issued some protective measures for witnesses, including to TCW 859. And in paragraph 54, this witness shall not have any protective measures in terms of his identity. And for that reason, parties can use his names and his identities. And this witness' name is Jun T for that purpose. And now I hand the floor once again to the defense counsel for Kiel Sampon to put further questions to the witness.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chun Ti, you spoke about your first meeting with Pol Pot in June 1978. I'd like to go back a little bit to see if you had the opportunity before seeing him to listen to his speeches on the radio.
As for Pol Pot's speech, I did not hear it, and when I met him, that was the first time that I met him and saw him in person. I saw him while I was working in Kampong Chhnam.
Without having heard these speeches, before you arrived at Sferang in the context of your activities as a soldier in charge of civilian, agricultural, and road construction missions, did you ever receive any information at the end of 1977 about a Vietnamese invasion or incursion into Cambodian territory? Does that remind you of anything?
Before 1977, I attended meetings, but it was not chaired by Pol Pot. It was by my commanders. He spoke about neighboring countries that wanted to encroach into our territory. At that time, although I was a soldier, I still engaged more in the rice production, and only when the Vietnamese troops incurred in 1978, that is the UN troops incurred into our territory, we were informed about that.
We were talking about an incursion in 1978. You have no memory of an incursion at the end of 1977?
No, I was not aware of that incursion because I was further back to the west, away from the border area.
Were you aware of a break in diplomatic relations with Vietnam and a possible declaration of war by Democratic Kampuchea?
Regarding any diplomatic matter, I did not have any understanding about it. As for the announcement on the attacking of the June, there was no such announcement either. However, we were told to defend our territory, and we were there in order to defend our territory, and if there was any incursion, we had to contain them.
Vous avez...
You spoke of the fact that you were in charge of an area at a distance of 200 kilometers from the border. I'd like to read to you an excerpt from a speech by Pol Pot, which is a bit before you arrived in Sve Reang, but which talks about the way in which the DK troops were able to fight and which weaponry they had at their disposal. I will then be asking questions to find out if, when you were at Sve Reang, the situation was similar. The excerpt of the speech that I would like to read is in a Revolutionary Standard of April 78, E3/4604. And the excerpt in question in French ERN 00620345. In Khmer, it's 0064714. And in English, 00519-835. And while the parties are looking for this passage, the first question, you indicated during your testimony in case 02/1 that you had copies of Revolutionary Standard. Do you remember having read speeches by Pol Pot in a copy of Revolutionary Standard?
I did say that I read the Flag magazine. However, it did not have any text about the incursion by neighboring countries. The content of the magazines was to focus our direction in building the country, and it did not talk about fighting with the neighboring countries.
Je vais donc lire.
I will therefore read the excerpt that I mentioned earlier. In French, it's the last paragraph at the end of the page. This is how Pol Pot describes the combat and the way in which DK was organized at the end of 1978. Here is what he says. We carried out small-scale attacks by dividing the forces into groups. The groups were divided into teams. We met the enemy while attacking them. Of course, we're only talking about groups, but they were groups of very developed soldiers. We had at our disposal B-40, M79s, AKs, anti-tank mines, triggered mines, and grenades. So we had quite a lot of equipment. Our groups that infiltrated the enemy in order to attack them from inside were quite powerful. Our men were able to fight against the tanks. They were able to do this by using mines, B-40s, and fighting infantry with AKs or mines, end quote. My first question, I would like to know in the context of your plan of attack on the ground, did you form small groups in order to carry out attacks, or did you receive any such instructions? And I'm asking this question particularly, and it's a passage that I will come back to later, because there was often a question of the disparity in number of the DK soldiers and those of the Vietnamese troops. So, had you adapted your plan of attack and military techniques to account for this disparity in number?
That is what we could estimate, because there is the disparity in the population between the Khmer and the Yun. We knew that the Yun would have more weapons than us. However, we were the owners of the territory, so that we could deploy our own strategy, for example, by planting mines. We could not use our actual forces to fight against their large number of forces. When we were in the actual battlefields, we did not think of the plans from the upper level or to communicate with the upper level. We had to be independent in our own spearhead and try to contain them and to stop their advancement.
Quand vous dites
when you say we didn't wait for plans from above, do you mean that during the entire time of your presence in Svay Rieng, the essence of your strategy was determined by you?
The combat strategy I deployed was the ones that I learned successively, so I know them by heart and I implemented them.
et quand vous dites que vous
And when you say that you had learned it, you're talking about your internal combats before April 1975, or are you talking about something else?
I learned that strategy since 1970. We studied the combat strategies and other tactics, and the learning was successive.
Specifically concerning this tactic, I would like to cite another passage from the same speech, so it's still E3/4604. The ERN in French is 005-20348. In Khmer, the ERN is 0064716. I'm sorry, that's 7. And the ERN in English is 00519836. This is a priori still Pol Pot speaking, and this is what he says. People want us to believe that we will never be able to conquer them because Vietnam has 50,000 inhabitants while we only have 8 million. Don't believe the others when they say that we will never be able to conquer Vietnam because the Yun army has more than 1 million soldiers and that our army only has close to 100,000 soldiers. This is our logic, because we haven't understand exactly why we won the war historically, and we haven't understood what strategy allowed us to win the war. Concerning our strategy, how were we able to fight in order to claim the victory? How were we able to solve problems? The Yun army has almost 1 million soldiers, while we only have about 100,000 soldiers. Therefore, we only have about 1/10 of what they have. We have only 1/10 of their manpower in the army. How can we solve this problem in order to win the war? Our method for solving this problem consists of using small forces in order to conquer larger forces, so that the small can vanquish the large. This small number need to know how to use their modest forces in order to attack correctly and conquer the larger force. As I explained to you earlier, this is the policy of 1 against 30. If the 1 against 30 is applied, we will be able to fight for 700 years and we will always be victorious. But if we don't wage war in this way, we will not be victorious. If we were impressed by the fact that Vietnam has 50 million inhabitants against our 8 million, we would never be able to win. We would have to simply surrender to them. End quote.
Je fais un parallèle entre ce que vous venez d'indiquer et ce passage du discours de Pol Pot. Et ma question est de savoir si, lorsque vous l'avez vu avant de venir sur Svay Rieng, Pol Pot a...
Did Pol Pot speak about this disparity of troops and preparing you to go to Svay Rieng? And were you given instructions on the way to manage your troops once you had gotten there? And were you asked to draw inspiration from the battles that you waged before 75?
When I came to meet the Pol Pot in Kampong Chnang before my departure to Svay Rieng, he did not give much details, because the person was in charge of the general staff briefed us about that. And of course we had to compare the forces on the Yun side and the forces on our side. And I did not hear about the forces that they won against 30. Of course, if the forces came in overwhelming number, we would lose, because Pol Pot was not there at the battlefield. If we were overwhelmed, it means that we will be defeated, and that's the reality.
I would also like to see with you if a certain number of areas will refresh your memory concerning the various clashes that might have occurred during the time that you were at Svay Rieng. But first, I would like to see if there was any communication of information between the various divisions and regiments, and if so, how did this occur?
Regarding other surrounding units, We do not exchange information with them. We could hear gunfight and we could see each other. Only once in a while, Taran side would come to give us some information to reinforce our spirit in order to contain any advancement. And there was nothing much more than that.
Est-ce que vous
Did you receive information on the positions of the enemy?
No, I did not.
Je vous dis ça
I'm asking this because in E34593, in answer 19, you speak of the telegram that you received, and you say this: I have already received telegrams concerning the plans and activities of the armed forces, but only at the level of division or brigade. And this was all decoded from original telegrams that had been written in secret code. They weren't communicated to any regions other than myself or any other zones. They spoke of enemy activities. Does this refresh your memory? And did you have telegrams that talked about enemy activities?
Yes, I recall that we received the plan that is Tasung, the divisional commander, and then he forwarded it to me for the dissemination within my unit.
Et nous sommes d'accord, c'est
And we are in agreement that this occurred when you were at Svai Rang.
No, I received it since before I had not departed through Svai Rieng. The plan had been prepared for us before we departed to Svai Rieng, and later on I was sent to meet him in person and to meet Pol Pot in person before I went with my troops. And when we were in Svai Rieng, I had no further contact with Pol Pot.
Donc vous aviez
So you did then have a bit more detailed information about the situation on the ground during your discussion with Pol Pot. So I want to see if some of the documents we have in the case file will refresh your memory on the information that you might have had via these telegrams. I'm particularly interested in the period just before your arrival in Svai Rieng, so April and May of 1978. And the first document I'm interested in is E3/946. The ERN in French is 00332-727. In English, it is 00185-205, and in Khmer, 000-21015. First of all, I'd like to know if you remember, in the context of the information you received, if you remember clashes, fighting attacks that occurred at Pretonle.
I am not familiar with the locations that you mentioned, Pretonle, Kung Samon. Allow me to clarify the pronunciation. It's Pretonle, witness. No, my battlefield was not at Pretonle.
Alors, ma question était...
My question was different. I'm not asking you if you fought at Pretonle, but if before arriving in Sve Reng, anyone had talked to you about what occurred there. And to be more complete, I will read this excerpt of a telegram which talks about this area. It's a telegram addressed or sent in 26 April 78 to Uncles Nguyen Van Vorn and Bureau, the Office of Archives. It's in paragraph 2, well, paragraph 1 also. It says the situation is the same as reported to you this morning. At the point of the presence of the enemy at Pretonle, they suddenly pushed in straight up towards house letter S and drove their way towards Prea at the border via Kok. But when they arrived at Kok, the canals were closed and they were stuck. I'm continuing with paragraph 3. They launched attacks from the front, but we killed many of them in the clash and they were not able to move in. There were 8 tanks pushing from Comrade Mun, heading north towards Ta'e. The remaining elements want to enter via Koki Saum to save their troops being trapped north of Kok. Paragraph 5. Some residents were injured and killed at Pretonle as well when the enemy launched a surprise attack or a flash attack. We have taken measures to save them. End quote. So my question is, this is a report on a particular attack which took place at Pretonle.
Vous avez le souvenir?
Do you remember anyone having talked to you about this attack in April 1978 when you were given information on the East Zone where you were going to be posted?
Allow me to clarify. The names of the battlefields that you raised, I can tell you that I did not know any of them. And I did not receive any instruction regarding them.
Je voudrais voir avec vous un...
I'd like us to look at another document to ascertain whether other names would refresh your memory, be it by way of information that was provided prior to your arrival in 1978, or to find out whether those are areas where you engage in fighting and on which you received information by virtue of your position as Fairien. And I'm referring to document E3/862. It is a situational report on the entire sector and the entire regions. Trained in May 1978, the ERN in French is 00814597. ERN in Khmer 000021019, and in ERN in English 00185 and capital A01 talks of this situation. One, the enemy from the outside. In region 24, we have wiped clean the Yuan land swallowing enemy to prevent them from living along the border. We constantly attack and push them. The enemy has retreated further from the border. In region 23, the Yuan enemy that had invaded our territory beginning from April the 26th, 1978, has fallen into our trap, and we have now surrounded them. The enemy have shrunk and were made unmovable in 3 places. 1, at the location east of Bos Kliang Pagoda, Bosch Mon sub-district, Samrang district. 2, at Kak Svai Rumpier sub-district, Pra South district. 3, at Tatney village, Bantier Crane sub-district, Kampong Ro district. The situation of the enemy. Their tanks are mobile up and down at the border to Ville village in Samrang district. They shelled many rounds from the tanks' heavy weapons onto Strung Popel sub-district, Chak sub-district, and Sanke sub-district. In Kampong Ro district, they fired everywhere and subsequently shelled onto our people that were harvesting rice crops. End of quote. Does this reading of the situational report in May 1978 refresh your memory as to things that were told to you before your arrival in June 1978? And do the various places I have mentioned in the quotation, and my colleague will give you the correct pronunciation of the names in Khmer. Are these places that you came across as part of your military activities, military operations, or you heard about these places?
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me read the name of the locations. One is to the east of Wat Bok Klang, and another one at Kak in Svai Rumpia, and another one at Tani of Kampong Ro district. So according to the interpretation, there was a discrepancy regarding the first location. Answer, let me clarify about the locations. You talked that it happened in October. I was not there yet. As I told you, I arrived there in June, and when I arrived there, I saw soldiers had already been deployed there, and I saw the Vietnamese soldiers on the opposite side.
Alors, je ne sais pas s'il y a eu un problème dans la traduction.
There may have been a problem in the translation, but the document I referred to talks of May 1978, and I specifically refer to that period because it is close to the time when you arrived in Svai Rieng. I understand from your answer that the places or the place names ring a bell, and you do recall that indeed the forces of Democratic Cambodia were deployed at that location or at those locations. Is that what I should gather from your answer?
Answer. At that time, they had already pushed them to the east. For my force, we were considered just a reinforcement force.
D'accord. Et
Very well. And this information, as to the effect that they had been repelled from there, is that information you received before you arrived in Sveiring, or you obtained that information when you got there?
I received the plan, and the plan touched on one aspect that the UN had arrived in Sveiring, but they had already been pushed out.
Et une précision sur ce point.
I would like you to clarify something on this point. We have talked of the events of May 1978 and the fact that the Vietnamese troops had been pushed back. As part of information you received, were you told whether there had been other Vietnamese incursions prior to 1978? And in the course of 1977, did you receive that information or not?
I did not receive any information about that.
Tout à l'heure,
A while ago, I read out to you your answer number 15 in your statement E3/4593. In that document, mention is made of other division commanders, and you pointed out that you had heard certain names. My question to you is whether, while you were at Sveiring, you obtained information on Division 221. Let us start with that division. Were you able to find out where those commanders were positioned, where they were positioned on the border zone where the fighting took place?
Allow me to answer about the situation that happened under the perimeter of each unit. I could tell you only about the situation that happened under the perimeter of my unit, but not about other units. I only heard about the names of those units, but I did not meet the leadership of those units. I only heard them mention that this particular unit was led by these people, and that unit was led by those people, but I never met the leadership of those units. I only focused on the situation under my own perimeter of the unit.
est-ce que ça veut dire que...
Does that mean that you did not have any coordinated military operations and that each person stayed in their territory and there was no circulation of information?
We were independent. If the enemy attacked us in a tense fashion, and then we had to contain them.
Vous avez indiqué qu'avant
You pointed out that prior to your arrival in Svay Rieng, you had been involved in civilian missions as part of construction and agricultural works. On the 23rd of April 2013, during the hearing of that day, 002/01 proceedings, the name of the document wasn't heard, Mr. President. Perhaps Council should repeat it. You responded.
Isn't audible for the interpreter, so if you would please repeat it.
C'est le procès verbal.
Is a record of interview of the 24th of April 2013 hearing E1/18.183.1 at about 15 hours 52 and 42 seconds. And you state in that document that after 3 years you were demobilized and that you took up arms again, and this is what you state in that document. After the war, all the weapons were stored and we had to do farming, and when Vietnam waged war, they invaded us, soldiers were mobilized. It took a lot of time to mobilize the troops, and it was too late, because when we were ready, the Vietnamese were already in Cambodian territory. End of quote. I would like to know whether during the 3 years when you were demobilized, did you receive information regarding the fact that Cambodia intended to attack Vietnam and that you would be mobilized as part of that attack?
Allow me to clarify. At that time, after the war ended, soldiers put down guns and engaged in agricultural work. But not all soldiers put down guns. Only some put down guns, while others still remain defending the border areas. And when we received the information that the UN entered our territory, and then I started to mobilize my force. So not all soldiers were demobilized, only some of them.
J'ai bien compris que seulement certains.
I have indeed understood that only some of the soldiers were demobilized, but my question is as follows. While you were going about your civilian duties, did you receive information that Democratic Cambodia planned to attack Vietnam, or you only intervened because you were attacked?
No. At that time, the leadership of the DK regime did not have any policy to attack Vietnam. But because they entered our territory, we had to attack them. But we could not defeat them. We lost the war. We had no policy to fight them, but because it is like they enter our home, so we have to defend ourselves.
Vous-même, personnellement?
You yourself, personally, when did you flee? when the Vietnamese entered Cambodian territory. Do you recall the exact date of your flight?
I fled in late 1978 because at that time the UN pushed us so hard, and my force and I dispersed and fled. It was in late 1978. It was in late 1978, early 1979, we fled because we lost to the war.
Dans votre déclaration,
In your statement E3/4593, answer number 20, the question that was put to you by the co-investigating judges was as follows. What suggestions would you like to make regarding the trial of senior Khmer Rouge leaders? And this was your answer. I have no suggestions to make because that is of no interest to me. That story is full of inextricable links, and if I had to talk about it, I would have to start from the very beginning and go to the end, and that would only concern the period when the Khmer Rouge regime was in power. What do you understand by, what do you mean by this story is full of inextricable links? Can you explain that, please?
You asked me to talk about the period between 1975 and 1979. It's difficult to talk about the situation within the scope of this period because the story had connections with a situation before that time period.
I
would like us now to deal with the last point in your testimony, and it has to do with the issue of marriages. You referred to before the co-investigating judges. Before putting more general questions to you, I would like to point out to the chamber, or I'd like you to point out to the chamber when you got married and where.
I got married in 1979 at Lung Wet. It's at Lung Wet in Kampong Chnang province.
J'ai entendu dans la traduction.
I have heard through the interpretation that you got married in 1979. Was that after the Democratic Kampuchea period? And secondly, the interpreter did not understand where exactly you got married.
Allow me to clarify. The person who interviewed me about my marriage, I told him or her that I got married in 1976. It was in 1976, not 1979. Because in 1979, we already lost the war to Vietnam. We had no time to arrange for the marriage.
D'accord, donc en 60.
Very well, then. You got married in 1976. Can you tell the chamber where you got married?
My marriage took place at Lung Wet.
Long Vec, c'était bien l'endroit.
Was Long Vec indeed where you were stationed before you arrived in Svay Rieng? Is that correct?
Yes, Lung Wei was my my base, the area where my unit were based.
Est-ce que vous pouvez indiquer comment
Can you tell the chamber how your marriage was organized? Who chose your spouse? And how the ceremony was organized? And can you also say whether you had to request leave before you could be married?
The marriage at that time were arranged with my wife, and my wife survived until now. The marriage took place out of our volunteerism. It was not forced. I proposed to the upper level, and they organized the marriage for us. But my marriage was not attended by my parents. It was simply a simple ceremony in which we held each other's hands.
vous dites que vous avez
You state that you made a request to the upper echelon. What echelon are you referring to?
There is Seung, the commander of my division.
Et votre épouse
And to which unit did your spouse belong? Was she also a soldier?
My wife was an ordinary civilian.
Vous avez indiqué à l'audience
He stated at the hearing of the 24th of April 2013, document E1/183.1, that is during the proceedings shortly before 10:03 and 30 seconds. This is what he stated. In some units, the chiefs had to cross-check who wanted to get married beforehand, and the marriage was arranged with the approval of the spouses. And we got married voluntarily. My question to you is as follows. In the case of your marriage, how was your consent verified, and who verified it?
It's difficult for me to answer, but allow me to answer now. The relationships between men and women were not strict. People could interact with each other, and if they love each other, they could propose to their respective unit leaders to arrange marriage for them, and the marriage took place without any force.
Vous avez indiqué que vous
You stated that you made a request to your chief. How about your spouse? Did she herself request leave from her own unit head to get married?
I had met my wife, and we understood each other, we loved each other, and then I requested to my leader. And my leader asked me where my wife, which unit my wife belonged to, and then he contacted the respective unit leader for the marriage to take place.
Monsieur le Président, je vois qu'il est 4.
Mr. President, I see the time now is 4 p.m. Perhaps this is the appropriate time for us to adjourn.
President, thank you. It is now convenient time for the adjournment. The Chamber will resume its hearing tomorrow, Wednesday, 26 October 2016 at 9 a.m. The hearing tomorrow, we continue to conclude the hearing of the testimony of Jun T, and we will also hear the testimony of 2TCW 1045. Thank you, Mr. Jun T. The hearing of your testimony as a witness has not yet concluded. You are therefore invited to come back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Madam Soksajita, the Duty Counsel, the Chamber also wishes to invite you to come back to this courtroom tomorrow. Court officer, in collaboration with Visu, please make necessary transport arrangement to send the witness to where he is staying and invite him back to the courtroom tomorrow at 9 a.m. Security personnel are instructed to bring Keo Sampon and Nuon Jia back to the detention facility and have them returned to the courtroom tomorrow morning before 9 a.m. The court is now adjourned.